Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, January 31st around here, and it is my final show at GSMC. Want to thank everyone for watching, but let's finish it off with a bang. And we'll start doing a little bit of an off-season overview, a little guide to the off-season, give you guys an idea of what the schedule is going to be, what some storylines are going to watch, and when you're going to want to watch out for those to kind of unfold, and a couple of different things as we get into the off-season that is probably going to take a little bit longer than we want it to. Then we'll get into the way too early tiers for the 2025 season. I'll get my national title contenders as I see it, CFP contenders, dark horse contenders, and crazier things have happened type people, like teams to at least keep your eye out on in the 2025 season. Obviously, we'll not include every single team in here, but we'll try to get as many teams involved as possible. And then we'll do some hot takes about the 2025 offseason and season. I think one of the bigger ones is I think the freshman wide receivers take over once again in 2025, and we'll talk about some of the guys that you're going to be hearing from in that respect. Then we'll talk about the top 10 players heading into the 2025 college football season. No quarterbacks on this list. A lot of defenders on this list, especially edge rushers. So want to get into that towards the end of the show. And then to finish it off, we'll do a little bit of a weekend roundup, getting some coaching carousel news. Notre Dame has hired their new defensive coordinator, a couple of different things. And then I'll give my final words. Before I roll out of here for the final time, I'll give my final words to everyone out there that is watching. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, it'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, especially on my last show, so anyone that has any questions about this, please feel more than welcome to drop any questions you have in that super chat. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And let's talk about the offseason. It is going to be a very, very long time until we see a meaningful football again, and it's always an upsetting thing. You know, the season ends at kind of a bittersweet moment where you have this incredible game to finish things off, and then you wake up the next day and realize it's going to be a long while before I get to watch college football again. So let's give you some things to look forward to in the offseason, some different storylines, some different things to watch out for. But before we jump into all of that, I do just want to get into kind of the schedule of what the offseason is going to look like going forward and how that is going to work out for a lot of people, because there's a lot of different things that are going to happen and a lot of different areas where there might be some lulls, but there's still going to be a million different headlines coming out. And to start things off, spring camp is getting underway here pretty soon. There's going to be a couple of teams. I believe Hawaii has already started their spring practice, as crazy as that sounds, but a couple of different teams will start here pretty soon, get into practice. Definitely the winter conditioning has already started for a lot of these schools, so spring camp will start here pretty soon. Late April is when it will pretty much end. Early April, mid-April, depending on where your spring games are. And the first spring game is March 1st. It's Liberty, plays on March 1st. They're the very first. And then the first Power 5 game is going to be on April 5th by Clemson. That's going to be a really fun one to watch. And then April 12th, April 19th, those weekends are going to be absolutely insane. Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and more SEC teams play on the 19th, or on the 12th, excuse me. And then on the 19th, even more teams will kind of come into the fray. Some teams still waiting to schedule them, so we'll see what happens there. And then I think we have one by Washington, I believe, is all the way on May 5th. So they're taking a little bit of time with theirs, but at the end of the day, you'll see a ton of different stuff come out of spring practice. A lot of it is zero-sum. You know, a lot of it is the defensive line looks incredible. Well, how does the offensive line look? Is the offensive line terrible, or is the offensive line great and the defensive line is just that much better? And that will go on for a while. We won't really know exactly what's happening now. We will hear really big things, and I think one of the bigger things you're going to want to watch for in spring camp is just going to be Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, all breaking in new quarterbacks. How do those guys adapt to it? Obviously, Arch Manning with a little bit better of a foothold than those other two guys at his school, but at the end of the day, it'll be really interesting to watch what happens there. Then you have the spring portal cycle, and I think it's going to be insane. Now, I think we had a great winter portal cycle, and I think it was all over the place. I think there were some guys that were waiting just a little bit. I think there were a couple of guys that either they have new head coaches or they're in a position where they feel okay right now, but not overly confident, and they're waiting for that spring one. I think it's going to be off the walls, if I'm being totally honest. I think there's going to be a ton of different names moving all over the place, and maybe we'll have one or two huge fishes jump in, but that'll be definitely something to watch. Obviously, it was pretty crazy last year. I think it might just be a little bit crazier this year. And then, and then the silence kind of begins. We have these summer workouts that really teams aren't really allowed to be coaching their their players. It's a lot of player working out with player type of thing, and you'll find that that's a lot of times when teams win national titles. You know that the players, the quarterback that goes out there with his wide receivers and make sure they have the timing fully down, the running back that does a little bit better in pass pro because he was out there working on it during that time. So there are little things that you'll hear little murmurs from around these programs. The ones that you hear a lot of murmurs from, you got to feel pretty confident about going into 2025. And then fall camp, always a really interesting time, always one with a lot of different headlines, and I'm sure a couple of quarterback battles that are still not decided by the time we get around there. But going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold, and a lot of different things that are going to get into this. But let's get into the storylines and when you want to watch for these to unfold. And we'll start with the kind of the changing structure of college football. Now we have revenue sharing in college football and in college sports in general. We have to figure out how Title IX kind of goes into that. I don't know if that's going to happen before the 2025 season or afterwards, but regardless, you have $20.5 million to play around with now if you're an athletic department, and kind of distribute it, not necessarily as you see fit, but you get to distribute it among your teams, and it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of unfolds, how much Title IX really comes into play. Is it 50-50 down the middle with men's and women's sports? Can football get 50 and then everyone else gets 50? It'll be a very interesting thing to watch. And then you got to talk about the roster constrictions. 20 guys are going to have to find their way out of every single program out there, and you're going to have to find a way to do that in the spring. And a lot of it has already happened. A lot of guys have walked out the door because of this issue, but the reality is it's going to be a really interesting time, especially in the spring portal, when guys figure out that they don't even have a scholarship spot on their team. So it's going to be a fascinating thing, and definitely will be fascinating to watch. Overall, there's going to be a lot of changes, and we're going to walk into the 2025 season with at least a little bit better of an idea of what the why am I blanking here? Of what the player payment is going to look like going forward in college football, and it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds. It probably won't be perfect right away, if I had to imagine, but at some point we'll be able to get a good handle on this, and at least in 2025 we'll get a taste of what this is going to look like. Then we got to talk about CFP changes. This is one that I'm kind of losing hope on as we go a little bit deeper. It sounds like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to meet on February 19th to talk about the future. Frankly, I think they're talking about a lot of different stuff other than the CFP for 2025. Maybe they're talking about it for 2026. They could be talking about some bigger things, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, the two changes that I could realistically see happening but still would be relatively surprised by is we could get reseeding. I think that's a realistic thing that would not take a lot of, red tape or anything to get through. That's something that I think could be introduced. And then another one is teams being able to pick which quarterfinal bowl they play in, which is an interesting thing that would take a little bit of logistics and would definitely take some planning from all those different bowl games, but I think would at least have a little bit of benefit to getting that bye week and then being able to say, Oregon plays. They might have picked Pasadena anyway, if I'm being totally honest. But a couple of these teams being able to pick the one that gives them the best home field advantage just makes sense to me in the grand scheme of things. And we'll give that bye week just a little bit more of a juice than it has right now, for sure. Then we got to watch out for this. And this is kind of where I think when we have those summer workouts, when we have kind of that blank area where we don't know what to do with ourselves, we're all watching baseball and the NBA finals and all of that type of stuff. This is where you're going to want to look out for this type of stuff. And I don't know how quickly this is going to happen. I really do think it's going to take quite some time for them to really get this ironed out and really get into a position where they feel confident bringing down whatever punishment it is. And we talked about this yesterday. I don't think the NCAA is going to do much because I don't think they can do much. I think they understand that if they come down with an iron fist on Michigan, the Big Ten and the SEC are talking tomorrow along with all of the other TV networks and saying, let's just go play our own thing. Let's go take our ball and play elsewhere, and that's the last thing the NCAA wants. So I think they're going to get a little bit of a financial penalty. They might get a couple of little things around that, but the reality is the NCAA is not at a place where it can punish these big-time programs anymore and not expect them to pack their bags and go elsewhere. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. It's definitely something that is really going to affect the future of college football, and weirdly enough, you got to just hope the NCAA goes a little bit easy. And I hate to say it because I do think there are certain things that Michigan should get punished for, but the reality is, if they get punished aggressively, Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey are making plans tomorrow about where they want to go and how they want to set up their structure going forward. So that's something to think about. Definitely will be an interesting saga, and definitely one that I think Michigan's going to win one way or the other, depending on however it goes. then this one's going to happen on the field. So this one you're not going to necessarily see unfold during the offseason. Maybe you'll see some things that kind of ignite that flame just a little bit more among the fan bases, but at the end of the day, Big Ten versus the SEC, that's going to be incredible to watch. We get Ohio State, Texas to start the season. We'll get a ton of more showdowns to finish it, and we'll get to my hot takes later. I have one at the very end of the season that I think is going to be special between these two. So I think that's going to be a battle the entirety of the year, and really through the offseason as well. You know, the college football fans never sleep, and they absolutely will push that narrative, but it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold, and once they get on the field, it's the battle for the supremacy in the sport that the Big Ten has right now, the SEC had for a very long time, and badly wants to get back. And then we got to talk about this. This is the not-so-fun debate. This is the Big Ten SEC. I very much enjoy talking about that one. This one, not so much, because the SEC and the Big Ten are meeting on February 19th to discuss the future of the sport. And the reality is, whenever that happens, it tends to make me believe they're talking about the future of the sport with them, not necessarily the future of the sport with the ACC and the Big 12 and any of the Group of 5 conferences. So you got to just hope. You got to just cross your fingers and hope that these guys get in the room and they say, you know what, let's do what's best for the sport, not what's best for our conferences right now. Let's do our best to create a new governing system in the college football world, but bring the ACC and bring the Big 12 and do your best to at least play in the same realm as the Group of 5. Maybe not play for the same championship, which we've talked about before, but definitely play at least for in the same sport at the end of the day. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think all of us understand that the Big Ten and the SEC are circling a little bit of a change from the NCAA, and if they have to do it by themselves, they're more than happy to do that. But obviously, we very much want them to keep the ACC, keep the Big 12 in the picture, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops over this offseason, especially after those February 19th meetings. And then we got the countdown to kickoff. 204 days until week 0, 211 days until week 1, and those two teams face off right there, and it's going to be incredible to watch. Settle in. It's going to be a long offseason. It's always very, very frustrating. It's always worth it. When that first game kicks off, when you get to feel college football again, and when you get all the little tidbits throughout the offseason that get you a little bit more excited about your team than maybe you should be, but at the end of the day, that's what this season's about. It's about enjoying everything and getting yourself a little bit delusional about your teams at certain times. So it's going to be a weird offseason. There's going to be a lot of movement around the outskirts of this sport that are going to mess with a lot of different things within this sport. So the portal is going to be absolutely crazy. I think spring games are going to be really fun. I do think there's going to be a lot of infighting between the two conferences, and especially the Big Ten SEC versus the big ACC and Big 12. It's going to be fascinating to watch all that unfold, and there could be some big dominoes that fall this year that end up being kind of the ones that put off the future of college football and get you started on what it's going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, and that'll be a fascinating thing to watch. There's a lot of different proposals on the table, and you just got to hope that the best one wins out, and the one that cares about the sport and tries to make the sport as healthy as possible wins out, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But overall, it's going to be a long offseason. Enjoy it all. Watch every little bit that you can. Watch all the spring games. Enjoy all of that stuff. And then it will be back in time. I can almost promise you that. And it'll be back. And it'll be incredible as well. So don't worry about that. College football will live on. And we'll just have to tread water just a little bit until that happens. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we'll get to my way too early 2025 tiers. So who are my national title contenders as of right now? Who are my CFP contenders? Some dark horse candidates. Some teams that you might just want to keep your eye out on as we go throughout the season, and a couple more right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave a little bit of an off-season guide to what is going to happen over the next couple of months. It's going to be wild. I can absolutely promise you that. Whether you're talking about the portal or the changing in the revenue structure or anything like that, it's going to be off the chain and there's going to be a lot of different things happening, but just strap in and try to keep track of all of it. But at the end of the day, let's get into the way too early 2025 CFP tiers as I see it. Definitely very early to be doing this. I'm not arguing that by any means, but I like to give an idea of where I'm standing as of right now. Maybe it'll change by the end of spring, and then maybe it'll change again by the time the season comes around. But as I see it right now, these are the teams that I think are outright national title contenders, will absolutely be in the conversation for a national title. There are a couple more teams here. I just have 5 per page just to make it look a little bit better, but we'll start off with Texas. This is a no-brainer. There's no doubt about that. I think I fully expect the run game to be much better. I expect the defense to be one of the best in the country once again, and that edge rushing to be just terrifying next year. So I think as long as Arch Manning is who they think they are, they should be in this conversation. There's no doubt about that. If he misses the mark, frankly, they should still be around the CFP. I think the defense is too good, and I think that run game is really going to take a good step forward. So even if Arch Manning doesn't become this world-beating quarterback right away that everyone expects him to be, I don't think Texas is going to necessarily be a team that bottoms out. I think they're going to be more than fine because you fall back on that defense and it's going to be one of the very best in the country. I fully expect Texas to be in the national title conversation very deep into this season. And then Penn State, this is the one. I think everyone understands at this point that 2025 is the season that you deliver, or a lot of people ask questions, and James Franklin might be in a little bit of trouble over there. So if they don't compete for a title, something is badly wrong, and there's no doubt about that. Whether it's an injury that unfolded or there's a couple of different things that could happen, but the reality is, one way or another, if they don't deliver, James Franklin's in trouble. If they do deliver, then a new era at Penn State could be starting in 2025. Then you have Ohio State. They replace a lot of people, but let's be totally honest, it's Ohio State. I'm not going to question their ability to reload. I'm not going to question their ability to stay on top of the sport when it looks like they should be falling off it. They're going to be more than fine. They will be in the national title conversation deep into this season. Then you have Georgia. Georgia was not Georgia this year. I think everyone understands that. Did not run the ball very effectively. Was not the most forceful defensive line that you've ever seen. And now they're in a position where they go into 2025 with a new quarterback, upgraders at the pass catcher positions. I think they can get back up to the top. I think Kirby Smart's on a little bit of a mission to make sure that his team gets at least back into the conversation where people aren't talking about him every week like they survived by the skin of their teeth. They want to talk about like they're the most dominant team in the sport and they have all the ability in the world to get back up there. I mean, even in a down year, they won the SEC title. So how much can you really say about what they can do? They absolutely will be in the national title conversation. And then you do have Clemson. Clemson is a team that I just love. I think the quarterback is the perfect person to lead this team. The veteran talent all over the place is going to be great, but the young talent with Sammy Brown is going to be incredible to watch as well. So I think they're about as good of a roster as you're going to find in the country, and definitely will be a team that will be in this conversation. But Anthony had a little observation here. I just realized that as a college football fan, that winning the national championship is not as easy as you think it is. Yes, I do think that's a reality, Anthony. I think that's something that a lot of people do, just kind of by nature. You know, the ultimate thing is you're playing for that national title trophy. You want to win that trophy, and he hasn't been able to do that. So it's fair to put a little bit of criticism on him. There's also, Ohio State to overcome, and Michigan to overcome, and now Oregon to overcome, and then you got to win 4 games to get there. So I do think James Franklin's a fantastic coach. I think he's done incredible stuff at Penn State. I just think he's not quite to that upper echelon level, but I would argue it's as much to do with the talent level on his team comparative to the other big-time teams as it does with him, and it feels like they're getting a little bit closer in that realm. So maybe 2025 is the year. He definitely will have as much, maybe unnecessary, but as much pressure as he's ever had on him in 2025, that is for sure. I would also include Notre Dame and Oregon in this group as well. Obviously, Notre Dame is going to be so good on defense. Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Jordan Clark, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, a million guys that are going to make some big-time plays. As long as the quarterback works out, whoever that ends up being, they'll be more than fine. And then Oregon, the trajectory just continues to go up. I have no problem believing that this defense is going to be a little bit better, that Dante Moore might take a little bit of lumps early in the season, but will be more than fine in the long run and could very well deliver them a national title. As for the CFP contenders, LSU is a team that I'm watching very closely. Garrett Nussmeier coming back, tons of playmakers, including the ones you brought in from the portal, tons of upgrades from the portal on the defensive side of the ball, and then they're better in just about every position that you could possibly want. Going into 2025, you just got to make sure that Brian Kelly comes through. You got to make sure that Garrett Nussmeier doesn't make as many mistakes, and you got to make sure that they make the plays that they need to. And Anthony, I have Miami right about here, and that's something that it really just comes down to Carson Beck. If he is healthy, I firmly believe they will be in this fight. I think the run game will be much better. I think the defense with Corey Heatherman coming in will at least be better. I don't know how much of a leap it will take, but at least be better and at least put them right around where they were this year. And I think Carson Beck's a quarterback that a lot of people will throw stones at throughout the offseason. A lot of people will have a lot of things to say about him. The reality is he can make a lot of plays, and he can make a ton of throws, and as long as you dial back some of the I have to be the guy that makes all of the plays in the world, you're going to be more than fine. And you're going to have an offense that is very, very good, maybe not this level or 2024 level, but at least around that level. And then the defense just has to take a step forward. So I fully expect Miami to be in this position this year, along with a couple other teams from the ACC, maybe an SMU or a Louisville. But we'll talk about Louisville actually here in a second. But then you do have Alabama. Kalen DeBoer in his second year at Alabama, one of the most talented teams in the country. No matter how you cut it, this team is absolutely loaded in every sense of the word. Ryan Williams, one of the best players in the country, and Ty Simpson just has to come along. You know, is it Ty Simpson? Is it Austin Mack? Is it maybe Keelan Russell comes in and takes that job, which is kind of what I'm hoping for, if I'm being totally honest. Love what Keelan Russell brings to that team, but overall, I think he's a guy that just has to be right, and that quarterback position has to be right, and if he's not, if they miss the mark again and they go 9-3, maybe even 8-4, what is the conversation around Tuscaloosa? How quickly is he probably pushed out the door? Because it'll get really interesting very quickly, I can promise you that. Then you do have Illinois. I think this is a team kind of like what Indiana had this year, where you have the veteran quarterback to kind of lead you. I think he's going to get even better than he was last year. The run game is going to be very solid with McCray and Lofrey, and I think you have guys all around that team that are going to make plays, especially defensively. You have some absolute dudes, including Matthew Bailey, that I think are going to be huge, huge players for that team. Do you think people are overhyping Florida a little bit? Yeah, and actually that's something I'm going to talk about here in a second. They're in my dark horse kind of realm, and it's an interesting team to talk about because I haven't seen too much from them yet. So, and the quarterback position for Bama, it is an issue. As of right this second, it is very much an issue, and the reality is I don't know who that quarterback's going to be, and on top of that, I don't know if that quarterback's going to be all that ready when he steps into that field. So there's a lot of things to think about with Alabama. I trust Kalen DeBoer enough to believe that offense and that quarterback's going to come far enough, but it's definitely still a question because you're basically putting your the hope and dreams of the Alabama season into the hands of a guy that hasn't made a career start. And then you do have Tennessee. I think they're just a team that the defense is going to be too good. Nico has to take another step forward, and they will absolutely at least be in the mix for a CFP. Oh, yes. In terms of the Indiana replacement at quarterback, it is going to be Fernando Mendoza. They brought him in from Cal. Very talented young kid that absolutely could develop into a player, kind of like Curtis Rourke. I think it could take them a little bit more time in 2025 than they might like, but definitely will be an interesting thing to watch, and a guy that really has a ceiling that is off through the roof. NFL scouts love that kid, and definitely will be an interesting thing to watch what he can do with Kurt Cignetti. But into the dark horses, and let's talk about Florida here for a second, because it might not be a dark horse for everyone, but the reality is I got to see them do it. I got to see Florida do it for multiple weeks in a row. What I saw against Ole Miss and LSU puts them in a team that I think can compete for a CFP spot. No doubt about that. They played incredible football. The defense continues to come along, and DJ Lagway is an absolute game changer. Now, the question is, does DJ Lagway continue this path? Because it's much easier said than done. To be able to say, go out there and be even better than you were in your freshman year is not the easiest thing in the world. So they're still a dark horse to me. They're still a team that I very much like, and a team that I very well think can get to a CFP spot. But the reality is, I got to see it. I got to be able to see it multiple weeks in a row where I can trust Billy Napier to go get 10 wins in a season. Because right now, I just can't. And that's what's going to have to happen this next year. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. They play a very tough schedule, so that works against them as well. But overall, very, very good team, and definitely one that I think could be very dangerous in 2025. Louisville's the team that I absolutely love. I think they're just kind of slipping around right now under the radar, but the running back room is as good as you're going to find in the country. Miller Moss coming in, I feel like, is the perfect quarterback for Jeff Brom and definitely is going to be a huge piece and definitely going to be interesting to see what they can do. Anthony, you're absolutely right. The Florida offensive line is the biggest problem with that, and they're going to have to find a way to. They brought in a couple of guys from the portal that I think are going to be good pieces, but you still got to put it together. You still got to put 5 guys together, and it's not the easiest thing in the world by any means. Then you have Bryce Underwood in Michigan. If he hits, they absolutely can make a little bit of a run here. They can do some really special things. I have some worries about their defense, losing Mason Graham, losing Kenneth Grant, losing Will Johnson. But the reality is, I think they'll be more than fine on that side of the ball. They're going to need to take a little bit of a step forward offensively. There's no doubt about that. Bryce Underwood should do that to a certain extent. Can he do that all the way? So I wouldn't necessarily bet on Michigan making it to the CFP, but wouldn't necessarily be surprised either. And then Washington with Damon Williams Jr. Just cannot love this kid enough, if I'm being honest. The talent is out of this world. I think the wide receiver room over at Washington is one of the more underrated units in the entire country, and I think it's a team that could do some really special things in 2025. And then you got A&M. This might be a little bit low for A&M. I know a lot of people loved him. I know J.D. Pickell had them in his top 10, so a lot of people really, really like this team. Again, I just got to see it. You know, you were 7-1 halfway through the year and 5-0 in the SEC, and then you finished 8-5. So how am I supposed to feel confident going into next year? I do think they're going to be more talented. I think Marcel Reed will take that next step forward. But the reality is, until I see it, I can't feel overly confident that they're going to compete for a CFP spot really deep into the season. Now, to be totally fair, they did have a spot in the SEC championship waiting for them if they were able to beat Texas, but that probably shouldn't have been the case. They probably should have been in that game before that game even started because they definitely should have beaten Auburn. They probably should have beaten South Carolina. So that's something that's just more, I just got to see it a little bit more to feel confident in it. And also, the entire Big 12 is in this group, except for a couple of teams I'm going to break down here in a second, but most of the Big 12 is in this group because if you can give me a confident Big 12 pick for a champion, I'm going to call you a liar, respectfully. It's one of those conferences that I don't think we're ever going to get a beat on, at least for the next couple of years. And then the keep your eye on group, the group that I love the most, if I'm being honest, Nebraska. I can't say Nebraska is going to be able to make it to the CFP, but let's just say Dylan Raiola becomes the quarterback that a lot of us thought he was going to be coming out of high school, and he was in different points in the season in his freshman year. What if he takes that big-time leap? And what if Dane Key coming in and Williams Nawari coming in and all of those guys coming in from the portal makes a huge difference? You know, I think they're in a position where the schedule's not going to be the easiest thing in the world. They're going to have to go through some big-time teams, but things click very quickly. Matt Rule has been one to be known that it just takes 1 year for everything to kind of come into order, and then he goes off running. I think it could very well happen for Nebraska this year. Then you got Georgia Tech, another team that I'm not necessarily betting on, but watching very, very closely. What Brent Key does over there is incredible. They are never going to feel like they're out of a game, and then Haynes King leading that offense makes it one of the more efficient groups in the entire country. So I think that's a program that absolutely can make a little bit of a run. The schedule's a nightmare, so that makes it a little bit tougher for them to possibly make a CFP run, but definitely could be a team that you see in headlines all across the year that just they beat someone they weren't supposed to beat, and over and over and over again. And then you do have Baylor, a team that I think Sawyer Robertson is one of the more underappreciated quarterbacks in the entire country. He can do so many different things for you, and he ignited that Baylor team late on in the season where they badly needed it, and Dave Aranda badly needed it. And then you do have Iowa. Iowa with Mark Gronowski is one that I'm maybe one of the teams I'm most excited to see as we get into 2025 because I think they have a lot of different things. They can take advantage of a manageable schedule and have a very nice year in 2025. That's one of Anthony's favorites, I know, so I very well think that they can make a little bit of a run next year. And then Colorado, always a team that you're going to want to buy into, always a team that's going to be really fun. I am a little bit worried about Caden Salter. I think he has all the ability in the world, and I think that run game is going to take a step forward with his ability to run the football, but at the end of the day, can he make the right decisions? Can he not make the mistakes that will put Colorado in a hole is going to be a big-time question, and then if you start Juju Lewis, is he ready for the moment? Is he at a freshman level all the way ready to do all the things he needs to do? I would argue no. I would argue he's not quite there yet. I would argue it has to be Caden Salter. I can't necessarily say I'm overly confident in what Caden Salter can do. Now, I do think he has that top-end talent that could really get Colorado where they need to be, which is why you're going to want to keep an eye on him one way or another. But the reality is, it is a pretty steep drop-off from him, from Shedeur Sanders to him, and we'll see how Colorado kind of handles that going into the 2025 season. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's talk about some hot takes. We got some hot takes for the offseason and the season for 2025. Definitely some big-time things, including possible NCAA split getting very, very real this offseason, and we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the tiers as we head into the 2025 season. Wanted to give a quick idea of what, at least for 200 days from when we play, wanted to give you an idea of where where I stood on all those teams, but let's get into the offseason hot takes. There's a lot of different things that are going to unfold this offseason, and a couple of things that we'll dip into the season for, because I have a couple of ones that I just wanted to get off my chest more than anything else. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and the first one is a good thing. I do think the NFL and the CFP will work together on scheduling in 2025. I do think there will be a reality where they come into a room. It sounds like they already are meeting in some capacity, whether it's Roger Goodell or just people in the NFL that are meeting with CFP representatives to figure out this issue, because it is an issue. You know, it's not necessarily ideal. It was one of those things where I had the CFP game on the main TV, I had the NFL on the side TV, but I wanted to watch both games. I very much wanted to take part in both games, and I think the solution is relatively easy, if I'm being totally honest. I think it's one of those things that if it doesn't happen, it's probably because a couple of egos in the room got a little bit too big, but at the end of the day, I do think the reality is if you're going to play it on the Friday and Saturday, the CFP, and you want to play the NFL on Saturday and Sunday, why not just do CFP gets 2 games on Friday? You play a little bit of a, let's say, 6 p.m. and a 9 p.m. or a 6 p.m. and an 8 p.m., what have you. And then you have a 2 on Saturday in the 4 and the 8 slot. And then the NFL gets 1 on Saturday in the 1 p.m. slot. Then they get their 3 normal slots on Saturday. That feels like a win for everyone. Now, I do think the 2 games on Friday for the CFP is not necessarily ideal. It'll be an interesting thing to kind of have to figure out. Ideally, the NFL would say, we'll just take Sunday and we'll move on with that. You guys take Saturday and we'll be more than fine. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think we're going to have to find another way forward with this, and I think it very well could be just figuring out a way for these two to kind of coexist deep into December and make sure that CFP gets the love that it very much deserves. And I think the NFL is on board with that. I think they fully understand that it helps them just about as much as it helps college football, because you get to see these guys on big-time stages. You get to see guys that are going to play at your place, and they're going to bring the money right to you. You know, these guys are very, very marketable, and let's say this season you see Arch Manning playing in a quarterfinal game. Arch Manning's going to be in the NFL at some point, and you'll be able to benefit off him being in those spots in college. So I do think it's one of those things that if it doesn't unfold this year or the next couple of years, it's probably just because people in the room have a little bit too big of an ego for different moments, but the reality is I think it's a very easy fix, and one that would at least heighten that product just that little bit more. There will be steps towards an NCAA split during this offseason, and I don't exactly know what that's going to look like. I don't exactly know how many concrete steps are going to be taken or how loud it's going to be. What I can say is coming out of those Big Ten and SEC meetings, we will know a lot of different things, and a lot of them won't be great. I'll be totally honest. There are going to be things in there that make us upset. There's going to be things in there that make us worried that the entire sport is going to change very quickly, and it probably is, if I'm being totally honest with you. I've talked about it a million times on here, so I won't waste too much time, but the NCAA is not equipped to cover college football anymore. They just aren't. They're fully equipped to cover all the other sports under the NCAA umbrella. They can't do it with college football. It has gotten way too big. There's way too much money, and there's way too much different interests involved where the NCAA just can't keep up anymore. You have to have someone else governing this thing. You just got to hope it's not just the Big Ten and the SEC. You just got to hope that the SEC and the Big Ten understand that it's not all about, putting your conference ahead or making the most money for your conference. It's about the sport, and that's a tough thing to figure out for a couple of these people, but definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. I think one of the ideal situations actually would be one of the private equity ideas, where you break it up into different tiers, where you have the 60 or 70 teams up top, you have the group of 5, you have the FCS, and it makes it relatively easy. The problem is they'd have to be willing to put the return on investment part to the side just a little bit. I promise you'll make more than enough money on the CFP product. Just let it be what it is. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I do think we'll get a little bit closer to that, whether or not that's Big Ten and SEC breaking away or that's revenue sharing or anything like that. That will be a totally different conversation, but have to assume we get a little bit closer to that NCAA college football split. Freshman wide receivers, I think, will steal the show again in 2025 because there are some special kids coming into this class. And it is headlined by De'Corian Moore, the guy going over to Oregon that made just ridiculous plays this past couple of weeks that I'm sure you saw on Twitter. But there are a number of other guys. Khalil Lockett is a name to watch for Texas. They're going to need help at the wide receiver position. This very well could be a starter for them right away. Jerome Miles going over to A&M, definitely a guy that you're going to hear from right away. Quincy Porter at Ohio State, that guy right there. I don't think he's going to be Jeremiah Smith. I do think he could very well be a starter as a freshman, and because he's just an absolute freak. And then you have guys at Georgia and Florida. There's a duo of guys at both those places that I think could be huge players. Tylen Taylor and C.J. Wiley over at Georgia. For Florida, Vernell Brown Jr., Dallas Wilson. Those are going to be some special players, and all guys that have to have big-time roles, especially those UGA guys. They have to step up in a big way because, as we all know, wide receiver is a big-time problem for UGA. And then you add in guys like Caleb Cunningham, like Jamie French, Travis Smith Jr., Cortez Mills. You're going to hear a lot from the freshman wide receivers. There are so many special guys. And then you go over to the 2026 class, and you see Chris Henry Jr., one of the guys that is about as close to Jeremiah Smith as you're going to find. He is an absolute freak of nature. And right now he's committed to Ohio State. Just so everyone's on the same page, it could be a nightmare in a couple of years for that Ohio State wide receiver class. But the reality is, it's a very, very talented class this time around. Going to be awesome to watch all these kids go to work in. I don't know if they'll steal the show quite as much as Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith did. I think they're going to do plenty in their freshman year. And then in 2026, it's just going to be the Chris Henry show, and we just get to sit back and watch because it's going to be a special thing to watch. No Power Conference champion will repeat in the 2025 season. This is one that's a little bit tough. I'm already questioning this one just a little bit. I'll be totally honest with you, but I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to make the best arguments that I can for it. And we'll start with Georgia over in the SEC. I think they're going to be better next year. I really do. I think that wide receiver group is going to get better. I think Gunnar Stockton's going to be a guy that can stretch that defense just a little bit more, use that RPO game with a little bit more effectiveness, especially with his running ability. But the reality is, I also think Texas is going to be a little bit better than they were this year. I also think Alabama, and maybe not Ole Miss quite as much, but I think Tennessee is going to be better. Florida is going to be better. South Carolina is going to be better. I just think there's too many hurdles. I think it's going to be really tough for Georgia to find their way back there. Maybe they will, and if anyone can among this group, it's probably going to be Georgia. But at the end of the day, I do think they end up falling off the hill. I do think they end up maybe even missing out on the SEC championship, but probably still making the CFP. Then you do have Oregon over in the Big Ten. They aren't the favorite as of right now. So Penn State, Ohio State is outpacing them in that respect, but they also are a team that plays Ohio State and No, they don't play Ohio State, excuse me. They play Penn State in this upcoming season, and we'll see if they can knock them off and maybe kind of end this conversation very quickly. Very talented team. Dante Moore coming in at quarterback adds some questions to that, but definitely a very talented team. I'll lean towards Penn State right now, but don't feel overly confident as of right now. Oh, excuse me, went one too far here. The Big 12 is another one we want to talk about before we move on. The Big 12 feels like a layup to me. I love Arizona State. I think they're going to be a little bit better next year, but the reality is, I think there's about 5 teams I would lean to before them, whether it was Iowa State or Kansas State or BYU or a number of other teams, because the Big 12 is crazy. I have no inkling that Arizona State's going to be able to run through that thing again. I think it's going to be really tough, and I think someone at least comes out of that other than Arizona State. Then you do have the ACC. This one's tough because I think Clemson's going to be the best team in the conference by a fairly nice margin. That being said, I also look at Miami and SMU and Louisville and a ton of other teams that could at least poke holes in this Clemson team, and I can't feel overly confident in this Clemson team until I see them on the football field in 2025. So I'll lean towards this is going to happen. I'll lean towards the no power conference champions will repeat in 2025. I think there's too much parity in this sport. I think it's going to be all over the place, and although Clemson makes me a little bit nervous, I'll be totally honest, I think they miss out, and I think a lot of different teams get to the top of the mountaintop this year. I do think we get a Big Ten SEC championship, and I think it's something that we all wanted this past season, but didn't quite get that with a couple of teams falling out. But it's going to be awesome to watch this unfold, because the reality is marbles all at the center of the table for the supremacy in the sport. That is what they're fighting for, and that's what they've been fighting for the past about 10 years. The SEC has come out on top in the last about 8 before the last 2, because the Big Ten has taken over at the top, and it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. Maybe we'll get a Big Ten title with Penn State, Ohio State, or Texas, Georgia. Maybe we'll get some variation of that. I have to assume that a lot of people, when they're thinking of this, think either Penn State, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, or Ohio State, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas. So it's going to be awesome to watch this unfold. Now, the CFP could create some issues with the formatting, because Clemson, Notre Dame, they could be teams that are in better spots, or in a spot where they're playing on a side of the bracket that doesn't have a very tough SEC team, or doesn't have a very tough Big Ten team, and then they can find their way to the CFP championship. So it's going to be awesome. I do think we're going to get an all SEC and Big Ten title. We could get an all SEC or an all Big Ten title. We could very well get Clemson against Notre Dame. So it's going to be all over the place. I'll lean towards we get something like Texas, Ohio State, or Texas, Notre Dame, or Texas, Penn State, or who knows, Alabama, Purdue. I'm just going to go crazy there. Alabama versus someone in that conference would be incredible, but I do think we get a little bit of battle for the supremacy on the biggest stage of the sport next year. And then the SEC. I will say the SEC ends the year on the top of the sport in 2026. It's a very, very tough one to do, because I look over at the Big Ten, and you got some really, really good teams. You got Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State leading the way, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, a couple other teams that are really, really dangerous next year. And then you got a couple of wild cards in that conference, whether you want to talk about Nebraska or Wisconsin, or a couple of teams that can make some runs. But when I look at what the SEC has, I think Texas with Arch Manning is the best team in the country going into next year. I think they very well could be coming out of next year. Georgia, I do think got the difference makers on the outside that they very badly need, and I think Kirby Smart's just not going to allow them to be quite as bad as they were this past year. Then you have Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, all teams that I think are going to be in the mix, and I think A&M and Florida, their ceilings are incredibly, incredibly high. So the way I look at the SEC comparative to the Big Ten, at least as of right now, the Big Ten might have those top flight teams, and when you talk about Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, I think the SEC has the depth that you badly need. I think a team like South Carolina getting into this mix would very much help, and I just think we're going to find our way to the end of the season, and the SEC bounces back just a little bit. The Big Ten is the number 2 spot in the college football realm, and then maybe it flips right back the next year. That's the reality of the sport right now. I don't think anyone's dominating for very long, but I will say the SEC ends on top in 2026, and then we'll see what happens in 2027 and beyond, because it's going to continue to get wild. I can promise you that. But let's continue on. Let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the top 10 college football players returning in 2025. Very tough list to put together. No quarterbacks on this list, so it's going to be an interesting one. But we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my hot takes for this upcoming offseason. A lot of different things will unfold, and definitely some things on here that I didn't even have that definitely will unfold over the next little bit. So we'll be on the lookout for that. But let's get into the top 10 returning players in college football. Very tough list to put together. So many talented guys all around the country, but you'll find that a lot of these guys come from the same couple of teams. There's a lot of double ups in this list because there's a lot of really talented players that are concentrated around a couple of teams. So we'll get into this really quickly, and I wanted to start over there in Clemson, South Carolina, because TJ Parker is a freak in every sense of the word. I think this is one of the best pass rushers in the entire country. Over 10 sacks a year ago. He heads into his junior year as one of the premier guys in the entire sport. I very much believe that he could be a top 10 pick when we get over the 2025 NFL draft or 2026 NFL draft, excuse me. Very talented guy, and he's someone that could very well deliver Clemson a national title. I think the offense is going to be more than fine. I think Clay Klubnik going into his third year in that Garrett Riley offense is going to be really incredible to watch, but the Tom Allen defense needs to step up in a big way. TJ Parker is going to be at the center of it. He's going to be the guy that steals all the headlines. He's going to be the guy that maybe wins a game for them outright, like a JTT Penn State type situation. He's going to make a number of plays and be the guy that we talk about in glowing terms leading up to that NFL draft. Anthony Hill Jr., the linebacker over at Texas, this is the best linebacker in the country as far as I'm concerned, and he is a guy that remarkably athletic. Someone that plays linebacker at that size should not be able to move the way he does, and he took a huge step between his freshman and sophomore year. He now goes into his third year, and I fully expect him to be another guy that goes top 10, top 12 in the NFL draft this upcoming year, because he's a leading tackler on Texas this past year. I fully expect him to be that again, and then he's off to the NFL draft. He's an incredibly talented player, can drop back into coverage whenever you need him to, but he is very special, rushing the passer, very special in that spy type of position, and if you're a football team, you badly need one of those guys. You badly need that rangy linebacker that can make all the plays in the world. This is the guy that can play 53 yards wide and make sure that he makes all the plays. Peter Woods, we'll go back to Clemson here for a second. Peter Woods, the defensive tackle over at Clemson, just an absolute freak. It's insane what this kid can do, and frankly, a lot of people have been talking around the college football world. I think he sits at 315 right now. If he got down to 300, this could be the very best player in the country. This could be a guy that totally transcends what defensive tackles are at the college football level and maybe even at the NFL level. That's how special I think this kid is. I think he can be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. I think he could very well be a top 5 pick. If he drops a couple of pounds this upcoming year, he gets a little bit faster, a little bit more twitchy, he's going to be terrifying. He's going to be one of the most disruptive players in the run game that you've seen the entire season. Had 3 sacks a year ago. I think he unlocks that just a little bit more in 2025, and I think he's a very special player. One of those guys that might not get talked about quite as much as he probably should, but just insane. A ridiculous athlete, and really, if he gets down to 300 pounds, he could become one of the best, maybe the best player in the entire country. Then you got Jeremiah Love, the running back over there at Notre Dame, had tons of injuries throughout the CFP, and it kind of tampered down what could have been a very special 4-game run of his, where he has that incredible run against Indiana to start things off, actually the picture right there, and a couple of different things that happened throughout the next couple of games kind of tempered that down a little bit. Had a couple of injuries, had apparently felt sick for a number of different, for the game against Georgia. Just a tough time for Jeremiah Love throughout the CFP, but the reality is he's someone that CJ Carr badly needs in his first year under the helm, because if you have a guy that you can just dump the ball off to, he's going to run 70 yards and then hurdle over a guy into the end zone, you got to feel pretty good about what you got. He's an absolute difference maker and one of those guys that I can't imagine I can't imagine the world where he doesn't play for the Heisman. I think he will be very much in that conversation, though. I think he will absolutely be a guy that, at least deep into the season, they're kicking around an idea of him getting to New York. Incredibly talented player, and I think it's just the tip of the iceberg for what we're going to see in 2025. Ryan Williams here at number 6, the incredible 17-year-old still. I think about February 9th, if I'm not mistaken, is his birthday to turn 18, and he will move on to his sophomore season over there in Tuscaloosa. He's as good as it gets. The acceleration is ridiculous. The stop and go is absolutely world class. The body control is, I don't even know how he does some of the things he does, and the hands are on the next level. The kid is ridiculous in every sense of the word. He made the play of the year as far as I'm concerned, because he made 3 different moves in that play against Georgia that I didn't think were physically possible. I didn't know humans could do that. He is able to do that, and maybe he's not human, to be totally honest, but at the end of the day, a lot of teams are going to be pushing for him to transfer in the spring portal. I don't expect that to happen. There's been some murmurs out there. I tend to believe a lot of that comes from Tennessee and Georgia fans and people around the SEC that want to see him transfer, but at the end of the day, I think he will stay put regardless. He's going to take over games in 2025, and he kind of has to. He's got to be far and away the wide receiver 1 for this team, and I think he very well can be. He's a remarkably talented player, and I think once he gets a little bit more of that physicality and part of his game, it might just be downright unstoppable, if I'm being totally honest. Then you got Dylan Stewart, the edge rusher over at South Carolina. he's built in a lab. He's an absolute freak of nature when it comes to physical ability. He can do so many different things. The bend is just absolutely ridiculous. The speed and physicality is a mix that you don't always get, and especially you don't get from freshmen at edge rushing, but that's exactly what we got from this kid. And he's going to have to be the guy in 2025. You lose Kyle Kennard on the other side of the ball. You lose TJ Sanders on the interior of that defensive line. He's going to have to take over. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be double teamed essentially every single snap in some form or another, whether that's a chip or just adding another offensive lineman, adding a tight end, adding a running back, whatever that looks like. He is getting all the attention, and he fully understands that. Everyone understands that. He's still going to have to make plays. If South Carolina is going to be the team that they very badly want to be in 2025, this is the guy, and really the defense in general, that needs to step up in a huge way and make all the plays in the world. It's not going to be an easy task by any means, but they're absolutely a team that can make a little bit of a run. Dylan Stewart's going to have to be the guy that probably delivers it there as much as Lenore Sellers really is. Then you got Denai Dennis Sutton, a remarkable edge rusher for Penn State that really kind of burst onto the scene during the CFP. Now, if you're a Penn State fan and people around college football, you knew the name. That was not necessarily a name that you were surprised by, but definitely was one that really burst onto the scene in the CFP and became a household name very, very quickly. I think he will be a top 10 pick in the 2026 draft, but he said it very, very plainly. He wants to be the best defender in college football. He said it a couple of years ago. He's found his way up to that level right now. I don't think he's quite there yet, but I think he's absolutely someone that's in that conversation, and he's going to end up being one of the best players in the CFP. He ended up being one of the best players in the CFP, and he could very well be a guy that delivers Penn State to another to a national title, because he has everything you could possibly want in an edge rusher. Definitely going to need a little bit of help from some other people, especially with Abdul Carter out the door, but the reality is this guy is more than capable of taking on some double teams and winning them. I think he's going to be more than fine and maybe end up being the best defender in college football at the end of the year. Another edge rusher, Colin Simmons. One of the most gifted freshmen I've ever seen. We talked about Jeremiah Smith ad nauseum throughout this year, and he very much deserved it. But the reality is, if there's anyone that's going to question Jeremiah Smith for that number one overall spot in 2027, it's going to be this guy. This guy is an absolute freak. He might have had a pressure on just about every single snap this year. It felt like he was always in the quarterback's face. He was always making the right move. His speed is just ridiculous. His first step off the ball is almost unfair to offensive tackles around the country. He had 9 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and an INT as a freshman. I think he's going to do more than that in 2025. I think he could very well get up to 12.5 sacks and be one of the most disruptive players in the country. I think he's a guy that every single time you talk about a Texas game, you have to talk about how the opponent's going to try to deal with this guy in particular. Not just the defense of Texas, not just the pass rush of Texas, but how are they going to deal with number 11? He's an absolute freak of nature and a guy that you're not going to deal with just one-on-one. I can absolutely promise you that. He's going to be another one that you're going to have to chip, that you're going to have to double team, that you're going to have to do different things with, because if you don't, he's exploding that game, plain and simple. He is making that game just his the entirety of the way, and he is taking over, and you're never going to hear the end of it. He is an absolute monster and a guy that I very well could believe that could take that number one spot from Jeremiah Smith at some point throughout his career. Caleb Downs, the safety over at Ohio State, is my number 2 player, one of the more gifted players I've ever seen on the football field. And it's not just the, outright physical ability, it's just his instincts. I've never seen a kid that walked into a college football team, especially a team like Alabama, and led them in tackles in year 1. He's an absolute freak and a guy that makes just always the right play. There's never a play where he feels like he's out of position. There was the play in the national championship where he got called for holding initially, and I think everyone watching was like, I don't think that happened, because it was Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs isn't going to make a mistake like that. It's Caleb Downs. So he's that type of player. He's a player that feels perfect when you watch him. It feels like he has about 3 of them all around the place, and he's going to make all types of plays in 2025. He was 3rd in tackles for the Buckeyes in 2024. It was only behind Sonny Styles and Cody Simon, the remarkable linebacker duo. Also had 6 pass breakups, 2 INTs to go with that. The kid's special in every sense of the word. He would go top 5 tomorrow if you were an NFL team, and he gets one more year to show things off. As of right now, I think he's running away with Jim Thorpe Award. Now, there will be other guys that will pop their name into that mix, of course, but at the end of the day, that is the best DB in the country, and it's not all that close. I hate being that guy, but it's not all that close right here. And then Jeremiah Smith, the very best player in the country as far as I'm concerned, and he's only going into his sophomore year, which means we get 2 more years of this kid. And if you're a Michigan fan, that sounds terrifying. If you're a Penn State fan, that sounds terrifying. If you're just a college football fan, you're very excited about that, because the kid's a freak in every sense of the word. It makes no sense what he can do on a football field. It's one of those things that you thought you saw everything. When we had Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State, you're thinking, okay, that's ridiculous. No one can guard this guy. He can catch everything around him. He can do everything you want to do. And then Jeremiah Smith takes a jet sweep to the house. And you're thinking, okay, what are we doing? What can this kid do? What's the one thing that he cannot do? And frankly, if Ohio State needs a little bit of an offense at any point, just direct snap it to him. Just get the ball into his hands right away and just let him make a play, because he's not a wide receiver. He is a football player. He's going to make every single play you possibly want him to make. He badly wants to be a 3-time champion, too, before he leaves. He had a little bit of a slip-up, said he wants to make it 4 in a row, and then went right back and said, let's make it 3 in a row, because he's leaving after his junior year. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about generational players, I hate talking about generational players because they very rarely happen, hence the word generational. This is one of those. I really have not found a better word to use for him. He is an absolute freak. He's a guy that literally looks like he was built in a lab to be an NFL wide receiver. He is going to be at some point, but for the time being, he's a college football player, and to me, he is the best player in college football. It's a remarkable group returning in 2025. It's a very interesting group. A lot of guys that are going to be all over the place, a lot of guys that might fall a little bit short of the expectations I just put on them, but at the end of the day, I think there's so many talented guys, and there's so many guys that, especially at that edge rushing position, that are going to be downright special. But one question here: who are the most underrated running backs, receivers, and tight ends in the nation? That's a very interesting question. I think there's a number of different guys out there you could really talk about. I think for running backs, I think you have a number of different guys. I'm trying to think of a really good one. Nate Frazier is a name over at Georgia that I think is really, really fantastic. Jaden Ball might be a little bit not underrated at this point, but the guy down there at Florida makes incredible plays all over the place. In terms of receivers, I think you have a number of different guys. Maybe a DeAndre Moore over at Texas, a very, very talented receiver. Maybe even a Jaden Greathouse, maybe a little bit on the radar now than he was before, but definitely a guy that I think is going to burst onto the scene, maybe be one of the best wide receivers in the country next year. And then you talk about DBs. That's a little bit tougher. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a number of really, really talented guys, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, I can't put my finger on. Oh, AJ Harris. That's the one I'll pick. AJ Harris, the corner over there at Penn State. Remarkable player, and absolutely a guy that I very much enjoy going into the 2025 season. For tight ends, I'll throw a random one out there. I'll throw out Lincoln Kerr, the guy over at Kansas State, a freshman that's coming in. I think he's going to do some special things for that team and maybe even be the leading receiver for that team in 2025. So just a couple of guys there. Was kind of scrambling a little bit, so might not be my overall choices, but definitely some guys you're going to want to keep your eye out on as we get throughout this offseason. But let's take our final break here. When we come back, we'll get into the weekend wrap-up, all the coaching carousel news, some replay changes may be coming. ESPN picks up the ACC deal through 2036, and I'll give my final words before I log off for the final time at GSMC right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my top 10 players in the college football world. I think Jeremiah Smith leads the way in. Anthony, I tend to agree with you. I don't necessarily think he's going to win the Heisman next year. If any skill player was going to win it, I would lean on him for sure, but you got to assume a quarterback's going to end up having a huge year and probably steal that one from him. But let's get into a little bit of a weekend roundup because we got a lot of things to get to, and we'll roll through them pretty quickly. So I have a couple of minutes at the end to say a couple of words before I get out of here. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with some coaching carousel news. Notre Dame has hired Chris Ash as their new defensive coordinator. This is a very interesting hire, one that not a lot of people expected, but he used to be the former head coach over at Rutgers for a short time, was the defensive coordinator at Texas at the end of the Tom Herman era, is a very talented head coach. And frankly, if you think back to that Texas era with Tom Herman, if he's hired a year or two earlier, Tom Herman might still be the head coach, or might not still be the head coach, but would have been the head coach beyond where he was at Texas, because Chris Ash was putting together some really good defenses. He was putting together groups that were playing above their talent level, were doing some really incredible things, and absolutely, we're keeping them in games. And then you add the Marcus Freeman into this, I think it's a more than fine hire. I think it's a guy that brings a lot of veteran leadership to this team. A lot of guys will respect him there, and you still have Marcus Freeman to kind of lean on to give you kind of the defense overall, and then you just call the plays for it. Now, I do think it'll be a little bit Chris Ash taking over just a little bit, but at the end of the day, I fully expect them to still be a man coverage, one safety over the top type team that attacks very aggressively in the pass rush. That's just the way that Notre Dame is built. I don't expect them to go away from that, so I think this is a more than fine hire. I think it's a guy that could really develop into a great defensive coordinator and maybe not be quite as enticed to leave for a head coaching job as some other people out there. And then some other defensive coordinator searches. Oklahoma seems to have turned their attention to Nate Dreeling, the defensive coordinator right now at Arkansas State, but he was at Utah State for quite some time. Definitely a guy that has done some incredible things and has done an incredible job with some different defenses. It'll be interesting to see if they can pull this off. It's kind of like a Zach Alley hire that they made before. Very talented young head coach that absolutely could be a really big factor in this one. And Anthony, I got to a couple of these before. If you missed him, I apologize. The Jeremiah Smith one, I fully agree with you. I do think the Heisman is not necessarily going to be his. I think a quarterback will pop up. In terms of the underrated guys, I definitely had a couple of ones in the past segment if you want to go check those out. But also for the Ohio State defensive coordinator search, Brian Haynes is going to be the guy you're going to want to watch, the defensive coordinator over at Indiana. Just signed an extension there, so it would cost a pretty penny for Ohio State to do it, but I don't think they're really worried about that, obviously. So if they're able to snag Haynes, it's about as good of a hire as you could possibly make when losing Jim Knowles. Very, very talented young head coach, and definitely a guy that you probably will lose to a head coaching job at some point here pretty soon, but definitely will be very good for you in the meantime, and then you'll be able to figure it all out on the back end. But it'll be interesting to see if this one falls through. Then maybe they do go towards Mark Guerrieri in that room already, the safeties coach. But as of right now, it feels like Brian Haynes is the one that they're doing just about everything they can to make sure that they get him as the defensive coordinator. Then we'll talk about replay changes, and they're actually replaying one of the best plays I've ever seen right about there with Brock Bowers. But at the end of the day, the centralized replay would put two persons involved, two people not affiliated with the conference involved with reviewing plays for all CFP games going forward. Bowl games and conference championship games would be a little bit different. Bowl games probably would be added to this list. Non-conference matchups maybe in week 0 would be added to this list as well. So something to watch there. And it just should have been the reality before. You know, the idea that we were working with inside, you know, it was all ACC people, or it was all Big 12 people, or it was all Big 10 or SEC when you're covering an SEC game, just doesn't make sense to me. I'll be totally honest with you. It's one of those areas where in college football and in the NFL, really, it feels like a place where they cut corners where they really shouldn't. You know, they should have these guys be as equipped as they can possibly be, make sure that they have every single angle, make sure they have as many unbiased sources as they possibly can, but it's something that they just have to do. One way or another, they got to make these guys, I would argue you got to make them full-time employees and make sure that they don't have to have jobs in the offseason and all that type of stuff, because then they can focus a little bit more on the actual reffing and definitely make this a little bit better of a product and deal with a lot of the rigged comments that you see all over the place right about now. So I think this is one of those things that probably should have happened about 5 years ago. Very happy that it's at least happening right now, and definitely one that I think it could have a huge impact on the future of the sport. And then ESPN did pick up the ACC deal through 2036. This is going to be an interesting thing to watch over the next couple of weeks because they got to make a lot of decisions in terms of how they're going to split up this thing going forward because they got Clemson and Florida State to worry about. Clemson and Florida State could very well be walking out of this conference here pretty soon. The idea, at least out there right now, is you'll push a little bit more money towards the Clemson, Florida State, Miami, UNCs of the world while taking a little bit away from, say, the Boston Colleges or the Wake Forests or a couple of those different teams, and the smaller teams would probably be okay with that because the stability of the ACC is much better than anything else, really. So that's kind of the reality that we're working in right now is the ACC has to keep those two entities involved because if they don't, the entire conference comes crumbling around them. And to do that, you got to take a little bit of money out of the pocket of some other smaller teams in the conference. And it's not ideal by any means, but the smaller teams really don't have anywhere to go. There's not a place for them to really set up shop. So whatever ESPN decides to do with this, whatever the ACC decides to do with this, I think it's just going to be in the name of keeping the conference a conference for as long as possible. And that's a very, very kind of upsetting thing, but definitely kind of the reality of the sport as well. And then we got transfer portal news. Hiro Kanu is a very, very talented young player that is committed to Texas. Defensive tackle over from Ohio State. He's a guy that Texas needs help on the interior of that defensive line. He's got 2 more years to really get going in. I think he's going to be a huge supplemental piece. Maybe won't be a huge player in 2025. I think in 2026 could be a downright star in that Texas defense. A lot of people in that Ohio State defensive staff really like this kid. He found his way out the door, and Texas got a very, very solid one. Jaden Thomas, the wide receiver for Notre Dame, found his way over to Virginia. Really like this fit. It's not necessarily the most flashy thing in the world or anything like that, but I'm very excited to see what Jaden Thomas can do as the main receiver on a team, and I think he's going to be a very impactful player. Now, I don't necessarily think he's going to light the scoreboard on fire or do 1,300 yards next year or anything crazy. I do think he's going to have a very, very nice year, and I think he's going to be a guy that so many NFL GMs want on their team because if you've seen this guy run block, it is a special, special thing to watch. But where would you rank Corey Heatherman to Miami and how it performs? Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting conversation around Corey Heatherman is I don't really know where I'd rank him in terms of hires this offseason. Jim Knowles to Penn State probably takes the cake overall, but that's a very, very close, maybe second, third. It's a very, very good hire over there at Miami, and I do think the question is, it's going to be better talent, right? He's going to have better talent around him. He's going to have more ability. He's also going to have to call more plays. Minnesota runs that very slow, kind of monotonous offense. Miami likes to run up pace. They like to do things very quickly. So it's going to be a little bit of a double-edged sword. You're playing with a ton of more talent, but you're also calling way more plays, and that can definitely put more strain on a defense that has gotten very comfortable, playing a couple of or playing a little bit more elongated game, not playing a ton of snaps, not playing a ton of drives every game. That'll be an interesting thing to watch. I think he's more than capable of making that team into a very, very good, solid defensive unit, but I do think there's a question of if he has to be on the field for 70, 80 plays per game, how quickly does that thing run out? But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here, and you're right. The Big Ten badly wants to get some of these teams and badly wants to try to poach some of the ACC teams. The ACC and ESPN are doing just about everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. It'll be a battle throughout the offseason, I can promise you that. Sam Pendleton, another Notre Dame offensive lineman, has committed to Tennessee. They badly needed help on their Tennessee offensive line, and they very well got it. He will absolutely start for this team, likely at right guard, maybe left guard, but will be a very important player for this team throughout the season, and will be a guy that, if he doesn't come through in a big-time way, then that Tennessee offensive line is still going to leave a little bit to be desired. Notre Dame offensive linemen, Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan, it sounds like Michigan is the team to watch for really both these guys. Now, Indiana's in the fight for Pat Coogan as well. He'll take a visit to both places, so that'll be an interesting thing to watch, but have to imagine that Rocco Spindler is going to end up in Ann Arbor. I think Pat Coogan could very well follow him there as well. So feels like those are the two teams you're going to want to watch for these guys, and I have to assume the Wolverines are going to win out. Then Jaden Rashada, this is kind of an interesting headline. He is going to wait until the spring portal cycle to really make his decision on where he wants to go. It's been a really weird college career for Jaden Rashada thus far. Was at Arizona State, was at Florida for half a second, was at Georgia, sued Florida. It was a nightmare. It's been all over the place, but hopefully he can find his footing wherever is best for him. Hopefully he can find a place that needs a quarterback and he can thrive. Very, very talented player and absolutely someone that can make a ton of different plays, but it is going to be something to watch as we go throughout this offseason. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what Miami does in the portal cycle in the spring, because I think there's a lot of great guys out there. How many of them are in the portal right now, I don't know, but at the end of the day, I do think there are a lot of really talented guys out there. I think you just got to go after DBs and defensive linemen. I think they have tons of guys on that defense that can make plays. I think they need the true difference makers. I think they need a guy across from Ruben Bain that can take a ton of energy away from him. I think they need guys on the back end that feel so much more confident in the back end, especially without Meach Powell being a part of that group. So I think there's some just little things they have to do. And overall, I think Corey Heatherman solves a lot of the problems. I think then you just have to get a couple more upgrades at some very specific positions. They're not that far away, if I'm being totally honest, especially with the young talent on that back end. They could be a very, very dangerous team, and I would love to see Jaden Rashada at one of the FCS powers because he would play some really good football, and that would be a very fun thing to watch. But finally, some final top 10 recruiting. Texas takes the cake as the number one team in the country. We knew that a while ago, but it is officially set in stone now. Georgia did work as well as they obviously do. Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, they're exactly where they usually are. No doubt about that. Then you do have Auburn. Did an incredible job this class. LSU, Michigan, Texas A&M, and Florida. 4 teams that badly needed this one. Badly needed to be put in a good position going into 2025 and beyond, and they did a great job with these classes. It's going to be awesome to watch that one unfold, especially Auburn, because it's a really good class right now. If they don't hit in 2025, then they might be all out the door because Hugh Freeze might be very well out the door. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch overall, and that is the entire stuff I have to talk about, at least in terms of headlines. Just wanted to give a couple of final words. This is my last show over here at GSMC. It's been an incredible time. It's been absolutely awesome. It's been everything that I wanted it to be. Came in about a year ago, and all I wanted to do was talk about college football all day. And I didn't necessarily have the outlet that I very much wanted. You guys gave me that outlet. So cannot thank everyone enough for, if you watched half a second of any of these shows, it means the world to me because this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Ideally, I would love to be around college football. I'd love to be covering college football and spreading the love that I have for college football. That's my ultimate goal in this world, and you've been able to give me that chance for the last year or so. It's been incredible to go on this journey with you. Was a crazy year. There's no doubt about that. So I got a little bit lucky that I got an absolutely insane year, maybe the craziest since 2007, but it's been an awesome time. It's meant the world to me. It's been one of the experiences that I will never forget and cannot thank everyone enough for watching along. Anthony, you're the man. It's meant the world to me being able to kind of go back and forth with you and talk football and do all the stuff that we all love to do. If you do want to follow me in my next part of my career, because I am not stopping in college sports, I am not stopping in sports media, because this is very much what I want to do for the rest of my life. But if you do want to follow me over on X, I am Bresee_Thomas. That's BRESEE_Thomas. More than welcome to follow over there. I'll be tweeting out. I'll be doing some different things over the next couple of months, and then hopefully I'll be finding a new podcast to take over and hopefully continue to build my brand in this world because it's everything that I want to do. There's no doubt about that. You will hopefully see me again around the college football world, around the sports media world, and hopefully you'll come along with me on that journey. And the only thing I ask, if you do want to come along with me, if you do want to follow along, and I would very much appreciate it if you do. If you do that, follow along here as well. Follow along with the GSMC people because there will be someone that will take over for me here pretty shortly. They'll be incredible. I promise you that because I promise you the boss around here, Andrew Tate, will not allow anything else other than a guy that absolutely loves college football. So it's going to be an awesome time over here at GSMC. They're going to continue to build. There's a lot of incredible people around here. So if you're following along with what I'm doing, if you're following along with what I'm doing every day and kind of continuing on with my career, which I very much would love you guys to do, just come on over here as well. The GSMC people do an incredible work, and they're people that have given me a chance that I very much love and I very much cherish, and it's meant the world to me. So cannot thank you guys enough. It's meant the world, and it's been one of those things that has ignited me even more to feel more empowered to go into this business, to feel confident as I do, and it's going to be awesome. So follow along with me as I go on to this next journey with in the sports media world, and hopefully this will not be the last time you see me in the sports media world. I'll be bouncing around, and you're more than welcome to follow along. Just follow along over here as well. But that'll do it for the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We got great people covering every single sport you could possibly want in the world. We got it covered over here. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered for the final time. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys around. Follow me on X, follow me on all the socials, and we'll definitely continue this race in the college football world. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys around.
Let's go.